The Alt-Right Represents True American Nationalism by Benjamin Garland, published on Daily Stormer on October 1st, 2017. I can almost hear the snickers and jeers over the title of this article, from left and right alike. For those who think the idea that the alt-right is the only true representative of American nationalism is far-fetched, here is my challenge to you. Show me where I am wrong. Show me how the Founding Fathers weren't race realists. Show me how America wasn't a white patriarchy prior to 1920. Show me where the Founding Fathers said women should have the right to vote. Show me where the Founding Fathers said blacks should have full citizenship. It's really rather simple. We, the alt-right, are white nationalists, and we want to reinstate the patriarchy. America was founded, in the words of the ever-insightful Fash McQueen, as, quote, a moral, patriarchal, limited franchise republic, a white ethno-state, end quote. The traditional family was seen as the backbone of the nation and was revered above all else. Women were considered property. They were taught to obey their husbands and that their world was exclusively home, hearth, and family. They were not to hold office, vote, or mix in the meetings of men or public affairs in any capacity. Sluttery was seen as an unforgivable sin. Women were cherished for this. They were not oppressed. In fact, without any room for debate, they were much happier back then when they were fulfilling this sacred and natural role than they are now after having been allegedly liberated. Here are a few quotes from the most important and celebrated founding father of all, Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "Women, who to prevent deprivation of morals and ambiguity of issue, could not mix promiscuously in the public meetings of men." End quote. Quote, "A lady who has been seen as a sloven or slut in the morning will never efface the impression she has made." To his daughter on her wedding day, quote, "The happiness of your life now depends on the continuing to please a single person. To this all other objects must be secondary, even your love for me." Jefferson was horrified by seeing women in public roles while visiting France, where liberalism had been birthed and then unleashed in a fury after the Revolution of 1789. He wrote to Washington that this meant that France was in a desperate state, and that fortunately, for the happiness of men and women alike, this phenomenon did not extend itself to America as well. Unfortunately, the words he wrote in the Declaration of Independence would later be twisted from their original meaning and used to justify that which he was staunchly against. All men are created equal. Those 5 words, without a doubt, have been the most devastatingly consequential words in our entire history. Both the suffragettes movement, which began in earnest in 1848 at the infamous Seneca Falls Convention, and ended after winning women the right to vote in 1920, and the Negro civil rights movements, borrowed heavily from Jefferson's Declaration. But the historical record speaks loud and clear on what his views on these matters actually were. Idealistic liberals and outright enemies of America have blatantly twisted Jefferson's seemingly abstract words, as well as the words of our founding fathers, to push their own agendas. This is not the founders' fault, and given that these agendas run counter to American history and American interests, they are on their face an insult to these very men who are cited as their justification. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these rights, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundations on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." End quote. The 1848 Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments quotes Jefferson virtually word for word, and then dishonestly applies it to women. The above-stated views on women have only been overturned recently, really only since the second wave of feminism took off in the 60s. For a while, those who held these views were ridiculed for being old-fashioned. Now that liberalism has so thoroughly taken hold, those of us who still hold these views, which again are the same as the Founding Fathers, are called radicals, extremists even. What these views really are normal. They are American. They are white. The Founding Fathers were staunch proponents of Western civilization, i.e., white civilization. All of their political ideas were formulated around what they thought was the best way to proceed with and advance Western civilization, while giving people as much freedom as possible, and also keeping them morally upright and industrious. As liberal policies based on equality are now clearly destroying Western civilization, it stands to reason that the Founding Fathers would be on our side, fighting against them, despite whatever abstract quotes can be cherry-picked from them to try and justify said civilization-wrecking policies. They were not malicious people. They really did want freedom for all, to the best extent that that is possible. What they certainly would have never stood for, though, is freedom for others, at the expense of their own. With that in mind, we can safely say that any abstract ideas found among them, and there are some, about freeing blacks and then bringing them up to our level are now irrelevant, because the data is in and it shows that this is not possible, and that even attempting to do so severely harms whites. And for every one statement of an early American founder pondering the possibility of peacefully integrating blacks that can be found, and these were just ideas, nothing close to freeing or integrating blacks en masse was ever practiced in their time. One could readily find 100 saying that this would never work, and that they must be removed. Quote, "Nothing is more certainly written in the Book of Fate, that these people are to be free, nor is it less certain that the two races, equally free, cannot live in the same government. Nature, habit, opinion have drawn indelible lines of distinction between them." Thomas Jefferson. We can debate over which aspects of Americans' founding ideology were flawed, and some of it without a doubt was. But what is not debatable is that America was set up for the posterity of the founders, and the white founding stock that settled, conquered, and built it. Race was the binding force of early America. One of the first acts of Congress, the Naturalization Act of 1790, restricted immigration and citizenship to free white persons of good character. By fighting to protect the well-being of the white stock of America, we on the alt-right are merely carrying on what the founders tilled, toiled, fought, and bled for, while those who are not with us are complicit in throwing it away. By fighting to protect the well-being of the white stock of America, we on the alt-right are merely carrying on what the founders tilled, toiled, fought, and bled for, while those who are not with us are complicit in throwing it all away. The amount of broken homes of white families of the innocent victims who have been raped, murdered, and maimed by black and other non-white criminals among us is absolutely heart-wrenching once you become aware of the statistics, which are actively covered up by our alien-occupied media and academia. The alt-right is aware of these ugly racial realities, and we just want to put an end to them. Yet for this we are called evil haters. We're not allowed to say those things in polite society because it might hurt the feelings of non-whites. This is the reality of the feminized, liberalized, and Judaized system in society we now find ourselves living under. It wants us silenced. It wants us dead even, simply because we tell the truth. But we're not going to be silent, and we're not going to back down because we know that what we are doing is right. Innocent whites raped and murdered by non-whites by the tens of thousands annually is what is truly evil to us, and no amount of epithets is ever going to intimidate us into denying that. We know for a fact that blacks are incapable of functioning in civilization. They are only capable of destroying it. Therefore, we want them out. We want to send them back, regardless if it hurts their feelings. That is the mature adult way to handle this. That's how the hard men who had initially built this nation would have handled it. Just go ask the Indians, if you can find any. Our government is now anti-white, meaning it is un-American. We, the people, therefore, have the right and the duty to fight to take it back so it will again serve our interests, as it was originally intended. This anti-white, un-American nature of our society is more transparent now than ever. Black sports ball players who get paid millions of dollars to throw a ball around are purposefully disrespecting our national anthem, and they're being celebrated in the media for it. Meanwhile, those of us who have been trying to protect the toppling of our historic statues and monuments, in Charlottesville and elsewhere, are being aggressively demonized and persecuted from all angles. And while the alt-right is being censored and shut down at an alarming rate, the so-called right-wing in America is doing virtually nothing to support us, and in many cases is even joining the ranks of our enemies in opposition to us. At least the liberals, Jews, blacks, and other anti-whites who are actively tearing down our statues and monuments, and disrespecting the national anthem and American flag, instinctively, if not consciously, realize that an attack on America is an attack on white people in general. That's why they're attacking America in the first place. It's a racial attack against us. The so-called conservatives, cuckservatives, who want to bury their head in the sand and run away from the race question are some of the worst, most pathetic, sniveling cowards ever to walk the face of the earth. They are a disgrace to the founding fathers that they claim to revere. They have conserved nothing and instead have already lost just about everything that this nation once held dear. And in their cowardice, they will only continue losing until their own genetic legacy is wiped off the map and then scrubbed from the history books. They are #fake patriots, and they need to be bullied mercilessly until they either join our side or get the hell out of the way. The main reason these modern-day conservatives, patriotards, and the like either take the view that our founding fathers weren't actually racist, or that their racism was just an unfortunate part of our history that thankfully we have now moved past, is because they have been gaslit by the media into thinking being racist is the worst thing one could possibly be. Racism has become the absolute moral standard for evil. This has not been accomplished by logic and debate, but by emotional manipulation and abuse. The media constantly shows images and sends messages that are meant to induce whites into feeling guilty. If we controlled the media, we could just as easily use pictures of victims of non-white crime and swing people in the exact opposite direction. In fact, it would be much easier to condition people toward our way of thinking rather than the current way, since racism is the natural and healthy default position of humans. Convincing people to go against their own nature requires almost non-stop brainwashing on all fronts, day after day, from cradle to grave, which is what we've had in America since the Jews have taken control, certainly since before I was born, and probably before my parents were. I sympathize with my white brothers, who have all undergone this intense brainwashing, and I understand that playing on guilty feelings is a powerful weakness of whites that has been exploited by our enemies to the fullest. But it's time to grow some balls. The clock is ticking. We don't have time to pussyfoot around anymore. Come over to reality, and just admit that America was never intended to be a proposition nation, a melting pot, or any other such gibberish. It was never intended to be a multicultural experiment. That crazy idea came much later, and is a blatant perversion of what this country was originally envisioned as, and a slap in the face to the great white men who built it. The melting pot idea comes from a play written by the Jew Israel Zangwill in 1908, well over 100 years after our nation's founding. Even if the multicultural experiment was created in good faith, at what point do we admit that the experiment is a failure? We won't admit it though, because now it has become a moral imperative. We are expected to hand our country to foreigners. Those of us who object to this idea are now unironically referred to as Nazi terrorists. That's how far we've fallen. Nazi terrorist is now a legitimate euphemism for those who don't want to be replaced by people who hate them in the country that their ancestors built. Part of the stated justification for this moral imperative is payback for slavery. Well, the Founding Fathers did not invent slavery. They inherited it, and most of them were against it. Just about all of the main forgers of America, up to and including Abraham Lincoln, advocated ending slavery and then sending the blacks back to Africa in a humane fashion, not to try to make them our equals. Quote, "I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races." End quote. Abraham Lincoln. This is also what the alt-right wants. Nobody in the alt-right is pro-slavery. We just want to be separate so we can live our lives in peace. Lincoln, Jefferson, Franklin, and Washington were all white separatists, white nationalists. That is what we who fall under the moniker of alt-right are as well. There are inevitably many small differences between us and them, of course, as technology has drastically changed the world since their time, and we now have the hindsight to see what worked and what didn't. But the core tenets remain exactly the same. If they could see this mess we're in today, I've no doubt they would go back and put measures in place to prevent it all as best they could. They would draft legislation designed to safeguard us, their posterity, from all of this degeneracy, from the dysgenics, from the Jews taking over, and from the hordes of non-whites spilling across our borders. But, of course, they were merely men and not prophets. They did the best they could. Now it's up to us, the only ones who are still truly fighting for the Founders' true vision of America, to fix this mess, or die trying. Anything less and we wouldn't even be worthy of the title American. At this point, unfortunately, most aren't. Hopefully, one day soon, they will join us though. We are the only option left. These are the undeniable facts. The alt-right is white nationalism. White nationalism is Americanism. Deal with it.